Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to Drak Reviews, where I take on another nostalgic gem that came out throughout 2017, as I take on the remastered version of the original Starcraft from Blizzard Entertainment. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Obviously, it's a remastered game, so at that point, it's easy enough to expect that there's not a whole lot changed aside from maybe a facelift, maybe cleaning up the audio a little bit. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the story. If you don't know the story of the original StarCraft, basically it follows the setting in the Koprulu sector, and you have three races to be able to pick from in the storylines. Each one has their own respective campaign, each lasting about 6 or 7 missions. You start off with the Terrans, as they are dealing with an upcoming threat from a feral alien race called the Zerg, as well as some civil war and infighting in between all of that. You then tackle the Zerg themselves and figure out how they work. They're a feral alien race that works on a hive mind kind of concept, and how they strive for their own sense of perfection throughout the universe. And finally, you take on the advanced alien race, the Protoss, whom you've been seeing dabbles here and there and actually having confrontations between the Zerg and the Protoss, not so much with the Terrans. They are an advanced alien race, and they actually live on their homeworld of Ire, and their purpose, at least their purpose as a race, is to get rid of impurity within the universe, and they see the Zerg as a major impurity, and the Terrans kind of that way, but it gets a little bit more complicated. That's the basic kind of premise of the original StarCraft. You also do get the expansion Brood War along with it, with all of the story that goes through. The other thing that I will give it plus points for is that they actually try to explain the gaps in between, because in between missions, there's actually a few points in the game where a significant amount of time passes. And that at that point, you're kind of left going, well, what happened after this point? This game tries to fill all that in from additional lore that is already out there, from books, things like that. So I will admit that I didn't take really any points off of StarCraft, but if you played the original StarCraft before, aside from the peppered in additional story that you can get, that's pretty much what you're going to get with this game. Moving on into visuals, this is where this game has received the most polish. Now, StarCraft came out in 1998, and back then it was for PCs and also for the Nintendo 64 if you were able to get a cartridge of that. And this is where I falter a little bit, and I did take a little bit of points off. In some cases, let me just say this bottom line. The enhancements to the visuals are overall good. I do like a lot of the newly improved models to kind of reflect StarCraft 2, as well as be able to give a whole new meaning to that character, a whole new depth to it through a new portrait. But in some cases where some models look really, really weird, the enhancements here don't help that. And they actually look even more weird. In particular, one character that comes to mind is General Duke, who you deal with in the Terran campaign. He always seemed to have a really weird-looking head in the original, and now they've just kind of elongated it and made it look like he's got a widow's peak. It's not pretty. And I also will admit that the new portrait for Kerrigan, while menacing, while dark, and while it reflects what happens later in StarCraft 2, out of nostalgia, I like the original portrait better. This one looks good, but it's just my personal preference. Also, some Protoss portraits are like hit or miss. That's kind of the issue here. And I did take points off for the visuals, just because in some cases the game looks great and the cutscenes look great, but then the problems that were in the original game are just made worse with the facelift that this game has gotten. Moving on into the gameplay, so if you haven't played StarCraft before, it is a RTS, or real-time strategy game. The basis of those is that you fulfill your mission objectives, whether that be to just build a base, and then take out the enemy, or any other individual objectives that you need to fill out on that map. But most of the time it is build a base, make sure you have an economy set within that base, build an army, take out the opposing base. That's the basic kind of gist, and the gameplay here really hasn't changed. If you played the original StarCraft, you've played this. The remastering for it is more of the facelift compared to the original visuals. So it's not like they improved on the ladder system or the build trees or anything like that. It's pretty much StarCraft as you remember it, and StarCraft Brood War in particular, or the original StarCraft and Brood War. So not really any points taken off on this one. It still plays really good. The only complaint that I would have, and it's a minor one, and it's my own personal nitpick, is that the mouse sensitivity on it is really bad, because I played in a windowed mode while I recorded this, as well as messed around in the full screen. And yeah, it's a little janky, but I can't necessarily fault it too much for something that I don't like, but I know a lot of StarCraft players do. Moving on into the audio, obviously they did a lot more cleaning up here. They tried to clean up a lot of the more, not bad audio, but like almost bad audio is the best way I know how to describe it. They pretty much adhered to the original score, to the original voiceover. So there's not really too much improvement here, or there's not really too much negative to say here. It's not like they didn't already have the audio and they had to go re-record some stuff. It all sounds really, really good. I especially do like the fact that the music is a little bit higher in volume, which has always been kind of my own personal gripe with the original StarCraft. And I know that you could turn the volume up, but I like that it starts off at a naturally high kind of deal, because a lot of really great music is in the original StarCraft. Moving on into replay value and presentation. This is where I did take a few points off. Replay value, unless you're a solid RTS fan and you're a lover of StarCraft, so much so that you play in the leagues or you play on your own casually, there's replay value for you. For anybody who is not so much an RTS fan or coming brand spanking new to the series, unless they want to learn and get better, they'll probably play through the story and that'll be it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. This game is pretty old, and if you want to be able to do current day multiplayer, yes, you can still do it via Battle.net, but a lot of people have since migrated over to StarCraft 2 and play the original, play StarCraft Remastered for sheer nostalgia. So at that point, I gotta admit, I did take some points off for replay value, but only in the case that for the new players, there really isn't any. They'll play through the story and then they'll move on. Moving on into presentation. Does it all come together? Yes, it does. It's very much remastered. It's very much polished. So keep that in mind when you're playing through it. But yeah, it still works. Now it looks a little bit visually better. The gameplay's still very solid. The audio's there. It all does come together in the original way the original StarCraft did. So I can't necessarily say I took points off of that, which is why I have no problem saying that I'm giving StarCraft Remastered an 8.5 out of 10. It's still a very solid entry in the StarCraft universe, even though it's basically a nostalgic remake. But even now, if you're brand spanking new to the StarCraft series, you just want to dive in, it's still got a great story, and I highly recommend that if you're into RTSs, you will enjoy the original StarCraft in its now remastered form. But is it worth it? So currently, you can only get StarCraft for PC and Macintosh computers via the Battle.net service provided by Blizzard. It is currently available for $14.99 US. Is it worth it at that price? I would actually say so. A lot of StarCraft battle chests that I've seen out there, even though they've gone down in price because of StarCraft 2, usually they were in the $20 mark. So at that point, for a remastering, you are essentially paying $5 cheaper, but if you really want to get it super cheap, I'm sure in some bargain bin somewhere is a StarCraft battle chest, and you'll be able to install it on your newer PC, and hopefully it works. But if you don't want to do that, $15 is not necessarily a bad asking price for a facelifted original StarCraft. And that's going to go ahead and do it for this review. Thank you guys so much for watching, and of course, I'll be back in time for the next review.